between the years 1931 and 1958 made many visits to the United States and Europe. On one such trip in 1956, he visited Mount in Ojai, California. Here he is seen walking with Agnes Baron. Agnes lived in Mount for over 30 years of her life. And here she is shown with Baba walking in 1956 on Baba's visit. Who is Meher Baba? He's called the Awakener, and sometimes he's called the God-man of the age. Merwan Shirya Irani was born on February 25th, 1894 in Pune, and he dropped his physical form on January 31st, 1969. And beginning on July 10th, 1925, he observed silence for the last 44 years of his life, communicating with his disciples at first through an alphabet board, but increasingly with gestures. He observed that he'd come not to teach but to awaken, adding that things that are real are given and received in silence. Meher Baba never sought to form a sect or proclaim a dogma. He attracted and welcomed followers of many faiths and every social class with a message emphasizing love and compassion, the elimination of the ego, and the potential of realizing God within themselves. Welcome to the Meher Baba program. I'm Fred Stankus, and joining me in the studio today is Sam Irvin. Sam met Agnes Baron many times and has some wonderful stories to share about her life and his experiences with Agnes. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Fred. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Sam, your first connection with the Mount and Agnes Baron, can we begin?
Yeah, we certainly can, Fred. I'm delighted to talk about Agnes Baron and, of course, the relationship with Avatar Meher Baba, which is what it's all about. And I had learned about Meher Baba in January of 1968, and was probably at first heard of him. You know, took me some months to come to an acceptance that he really was who he said he was. But in the same month, a friend of mine drove me up to a place near Ojai called Mount. And we went up to see Agnes Baron, but she didn't happen to be there when we arrived. So we drove up to the gate, and it was closed. My friend had been there before, so he felt comfortable going over the fence. And we went inside and walked around the property, and it was very beautiful. It's 170 acres on top of this 2,500-foot mountain overlooking the Ojai Valley on one side and down over Ventura, Oxnard, the Channel Islands, and the Santa Monica Mountains on the other side. Incredible views. And that was my first introduction. We had a nice day, but I didn't get to meet Agnes. And it wasn't until May 10th, 1968, later that year, that I met her. And on that day, or it was May 9th, because on May 10th, Baba had asked all of his lovers around the world to keep silence. Now, I did not consider myself a lover or a follower of Meher Baba at that time. But I decided to go along. There were maybe 20 people going up from Santa Barbara, and I was over there at the time living. And so I went with a group and drove up there in my old 55 pink and black Studebaker that I had at the time, and took a couple of people in my car, and we drove up to the top of the hill, rode up to the driveway, drove up and stopped right in her yard, and this huge cloud of steam came out from under my hood. And I hadn't met Agnes yet, but there was this big cloud of steam, and it turns out that my radiator hose had broken. And so the car wasn't going to go anywhere until I got it fixed. But I always felt like that was sort of an omen of that maybe I'd come to a place that I was meant to be, and I was here. And anyway, then I met Agnes, and she was wonderful, fiery. She had a great temper, and could get very angry, but also was very loving, had a heart of gold. And she has had absolutely a profound influence on my life. Found me a couple of key jobs that probably moved me in the direction of my career that developed from there. And without Agnes, I'm not sure that would have happened. A good friend. She, at one point, told me that she was my spiritual mother. And I have no reason to doubt her. She certainly had a profound influence on my life, and is a wonderful person.
How did Agnes come to live in Mount? How did it happen?
Well, that is a great story, Fred. Agnes was a fiery young woman from probably the day she was born. But when she was 15, 16, she was ahead of grade in school, and she told her parents that she wanted to go to Antioch University in Ohio. And they said, oh no, there are plenty of good schools in California. They lived in California. And they said, we won't support you if you, and she was only 16, going away to college, and they said, no, we want you to go locally because you're young and because there are plenty of good schools here. And she said, nope, absolutely dead set on going to Antioch. And so she did. And it was a 6-year program, and it was a very demanding program. But she went through the program on her own, defying her parents, and that set the tone for the rest of her life, I think. And there was also influenced by a professor who apparently was one of the best-loved professors there, named Manmatha Chatterjee, who later met Meher Baba himself, and whose grandfather had been a village sage in India, and who was an engineer and was a professor at this Antioch college. But anyway, Agnes, after she got out of Antioch, she went to Europe on her own, probably maybe 22 years old, 23. And at first she thought she wanted to study with Freud, but she went and Freud wasn't taking students anymore, and he was sick and kind of old. And she didn't like any of his disciples. She would form likes and dislikes very quickly, and she decided that she wasn't interested in studying with the ones she met. She met a couple of them. And so she decided to become a correspondent and travel around Europe. And so she did, and she started traveling and hitchhiking, often by herself, a young woman alone, down through the Balkans, through Yugoslavia, Italy, into Albania, which in those days was really cut off from the rest of the world, and was for many, many years under the communist regime as well. But in those days, it was a very backward place. She also traveled through Greece and all the way to Iraq by herself, a young woman traveling alone, and Turkey, and met some of the, some key politicians and well-known people, learned 13 languages during all this travel, was in much of Western Europe as well. And the interesting thing is now, looking back at her trip to Albania, we might want to stop there a minute because of what's going on with the ethnic Albanians in Kosovo and Yugoslavia today, and the tragedy that's unfolding there. Agnes had a little drama of her own when she was in Albania. She went to the American consulate and asked for permission to visit, and also to officials in Albania down in the lowlands, the coastal people, and asked for permission to go up in the mountains and visit with this society that she had heard about, of these people who were thought of as bandits. They would come down and raid in the lowlands occasionally. They lived in these mountain villages. And she was told, no, Americans will not be allowed to go up there, and certainly not a young woman traveling alone. But she was never one to take no for an answer, and she bullied them and pushed them and argued with them until she got them to agree. But they said, okay, but only if we can send a soldier with you for protection. So they said, they assigned this man with a rifle to walk her up the mountain to the mountain villages. And they started up this mountain road, and they got about 3/4 of the way up the mountain, and he aimed his rifle at her. And as she tells the story, and she said that he aimed the rifle at her and said that he was going to rape her. And she decided that he had a rifle, that she had better act like she was going to go along with him. So she sort of started acting coy, and he put the rifle down, thinking that this was a done deal. And she quickly grabbed the rifle, picked it up, and held it on him, aimed the rifle at him, and said, I'll shoot you if you don't go back down the mountain. And so he started running down the mountain. And as soon as he was well out of sight, she threw the gun away and walked on up the mountain by herself, and introduced herself to this society of both Muslims and Christians who lived in different villages up in the mountains in Albania, and lived there for a period of time, learning their language and writing down their laws, which had been passed down from this sort of founder of their society, whose name was Lekta Kajin, and that she had written all this down and showed me some of her works. And she apparently, she said, had checked it out and was the only person who had ever written down their laws. And they lived by a feuding system, not feudal, but feuding, in which one family would kill a member of the other family, and then there would be a funeral, and for 3 days they would have a big celebration. And then and they would all get together, both families, and then they would go back their separate ways, and then the other family would go try to kill a member of the opposing family. And while she was there, she felt responsible for causing the death of one of these people, because they had gone to this way out of the way place, and it was a group of men, and they were all going to bed down for the night, and she was the only woman there, and she said, no, I've got to go back to the village. And they said, no, it's dangerous. But she insisted that she couldn't stay there under those circumstances, so they started walking back through the woods, and one of them was shot. So they walked her back to the village very graciously, and the next morning she said, I got up very early, packed my knapsack, and got the hell out of there. So that's the kind of woman Agnes Baron was. And at the end of the war, she was helping mostly Jewish refugees get out of Spain just before World War II, at the beginning of the war, and until Americans were forced to leave, and then she had to leave eventually too. But she helped many, many people get out of Europe during those terrible times. And then she came back and she worked with Aldous Huxley, Gerald Heard, and Christopher Isherwood in some mystical and scientific projects they were working on, and got involved in Vedanta through them. And of course, Christopher Isherwood, who died not too long ago and wrote Cabaret, also wrote a book about Ramakrishna, and a beautiful book, and was very much in Vedanta. And Agnes became sort of a Vedanta nun. She never took orders because she said that she did not have the rapport that you're supposed to feel with a master, with any of the yogi, with a Swami there. But she did live in Santa Barbara at the Vedanta temple. She was the first live-in nun who lived there in the Vedanta society, but she had not taken orders. She lived there a year. And then about that time, she also met Krishnamurti and spent a lot of time with him, took long walks with him, had a lot of talks with him. This was in the 40s, mid-40s, just after the war. And then she met Jean Adriel, who was writing a book called The Avatar about Meher Baba, and she read the transcript, and she was asked to edit the book. And this led her to Meyermount, because she read the manuscript and said, this book is wonderful. I mean, if it's true, this man is wonderful, and it sounds like he's a real master. And she said that Vedanta had prepared her for understanding what it took to be a real master, like a Ramakrishna in that case. She got involved with the group of Meher Baba people, and they were looking for a center in the West. And they found eventually, after some other properties were looked at and tried, they found Meyermount. And several of them moved up to Meyermount in 1946. And she found the property. She's the one who went in and said, this is the place. They were driving around near Ojai. And everybody else eventually moved away, and she stayed. By 1952, she was the only one of the original group who was still at Meyermount. And in 52, she met Baba. And that's when he asked her, because it had been in someone else's name all this time. And at that point, he asked her, he said, I want you to take care of Meyermount for me. And at first she thought he was joking and sort of laughed it off and said, Baba, you know me, I don't like to be tied down. I want to travel all over the world. And I can't imagine living in one place. And he said, no, I want you to take care of Meyermount. And she said, well, all right then. I'll keep it for you through hellfire and damnation. And then she would laugh and say, and that's exactly what it's been. So that's Agnes Baron. And she was there until her death in the early 90s. Do you remember the year?
Yes, it was it 95?
Might have been 95. I think it was.
Or 93, I'm not sure.
Well, it was in that range. Sorry, I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, and also, you were speaking a little bit about her personality. I mean, didn't you say something, telling me once that she had something like a cross between a Mother Teresa and Zorba the Greek?
Zorba the Greek, that's right. I mean, yes. If somebody asked me, what do you think Agnes Baron was like? Would you describe her in a short sentence? I would say she was a cross between Mother Teresa and Zorba the Greek. She loved life, and she said that. She said, I I love life. I'm not one of these people who wants to renounce life or give it up. I love it.
She never married.
She never married. She wasn't interested in getting married. She didn't need luxuries. You know, she enjoyed herself. If you took her out to a restaurant, she would enjoy herself. And she would take a nip of scotch once in a while or whatever. She would even smoke a cigarette once in a while just to show that she could. She didn't smoke on a normal basis, but I've seen her do that. And I think her attitude was that those things, that she wasn't being self-righteous and was always irreverent. She was always very irreverent and had a great sense of humor. But didn't take a lot of the petty stuff very seriously.
And the thing is, she did a lot with MeherMount. Didn't she have like a daycare center up there and some other kind of Head Start programs associated in Ventura County, which, Ohio is situated?
Yeah, Agnes was constantly involved in some form of social work. And I mean, going back to that time in Europe when she was helping refugees escape the Nazis and the other fascist regimes, that was just an example. She just kept up her work for the poor and downtrodden, and also for children. She loved children, and she did start a school at MeherMount. She was one of the founders of the Head Start program for Ventura County. And then, of course, later, when Mayor Baba put out his pronouncements that drugs are harmful physically, mentally, and spiritually, and that the youth of the West were in danger, that a whole generation was in danger of being lost because of drug use, and that people should work to get them off drugs. She took that very seriously, and she went out and started a drug program on her own. She went to the county supervisors. She was never intimidated by anyone. She went right to the supervisors and said, "Damn it, we need a drug program." And she went and found a model for a drug program that she wanted to start. And so they funded her to run a program for youth who had been arrested for drug use of various kinds. And she called on, including some of the young Baba people, including myself, to be drug counselors in this program in like 1969 to 1971. And that was one of the examples. In fact, that was the first, quote, social work that I ever did. And of course, if you remember what I've done in my life, it's all been social work oriented in healthcare ever since. But that was really the beginning. That was the first thing that got me involved in any form of social work.
So you're saying that she was an instrument influencing you, because I noticed that also she worked with a lot of the human service organizations, even including the various American Indian tribes, in learning maybe some of their ways and cultures, like the Hopis or even the Chumash. The Chumash, which that's their territory.
Yes.
In fact, didn't she at one time talk about even donating part of that land of MeherMount to the Chumash? But anyway, that's another story.
Well, Agnes was very interested in cultures of all kinds, and also religious traditions and spiritual traditions. And the Chumash, I went with her to visit some Chumash camps around near Simi Valley and various other places, and some of the Chumash would come to MeherMount as well, and have been involved over the years. And she had always felt that there was a place for them at least to come to, and had even discussed it at various times that maybe she could give part of the land for some folks to live on. Those were various ideas and she had many ideas of reaching out to people, especially people who were downtrodden and needed help of various kinds. But that was an example. I also traveled with her one year to see a drug program in Phoenix. And while we were there, we took a trip to the Hopi Reservation. And it was just wonderful to travel with her in a place like that and to see her interact in such a childlike way that she had about her. She had a sense of wonder all through her life, and of curiosity, and a willingness to go up and talk to anybody and just lay her heart out, and just ask them anything, and to get immediately into important discussions with them. And on the Hopi Reservation, I remember taking a picture of her with this very old man in his little hut with these red peppers, the drying peppers hanging down from the rafters, and it's just a tiny little room about 10 by 10 that he lived in, and he and Agnes hugging each other and smiling, she would relate to people so simply and naturally. But yes, she also did suicide prevention on a regular basis. She would man her telephone at Meyermount and would spend hours. Often, she probably spent 15 hours a week on suicide prevention at a number of points in her life for years at a time, as well as staying involved in various schools, visiting programs for alcoholism, drug abuse rehabilitation, all kinds of social service programs, as well as environmental protection. She was very active in the Committee to Protect the Upper Ojai and various other environmental groups.
You know, also, we do have some photos of Agnes that we can maybe present now.
I think that'd be a great idea.
And you could comment on,
I'd love to.
On some of that. I think that probably was, there is Agnes at Meyermount.
Yeah, this is Agnes, and in the background is Topa Topa, a 7,000-foot mountain across the upper Ojai Valley that you see down below there. Right behind that mountain is the Condor Sanctuary, by the way. But that's Agnes Baron, and that was probably taken in the early 80s, I'd say around 83.
And also, wasn't there a case of a gentleman visiting who was a baron from...
Well, there was she had many fascinating friends, so many that it would take all night to tell all the stories. But yeah, one example, and it's just one little example, was a friend of hers. Agnes loved to... Oh, here's a picture of me and my daughter, Stephanie, up at Meyermount. My daughter was born in 83, so that was about 85.
Yeah, we'll bring that story back up about the Baron.
And of course, Agnes loved animals, always had dogs and cats, and they were wonderful animals, and loved children as well. There's my daughter, Stephanie, again. One story about a dog is that when Baba was up at Meyermount, her dog, Kali, Baba patted on the head and said that the dog would be a human being in her next life. This is my daughter, Stephanie, again. And this is a group of fellows who had been up having a work party at Meyermount that day. On the left is Charlie Christian, Rusty Bostwick, behind Agnes, and Bobby Hazard, and then my wife, Margaret, and myself, and our daughter. And here's Agnes Baron at a Christmas party at my house, as a matter of fact, down in Long Beach. She very seldom would leave the mountain, but we did drag her away for a night or two. And here's a birthday party in 1988 at Meyermount. And my wife, Margaret, is holding a cake, and my daughter, Stephanie, in the middle. And then in the back is your lovely wife, Fred, Gigi.
That's wonderful.
And there are you and Gigi standing back there eating cake and talking with Agnes in the foreground.
It was just...
That was, again, in 1988, yeah.
11 years ago.
It's amazing how time flies, huh?
Indeed.
And there's Gigi with Agnes.
Maybe you could quickly give us that final story on that Baron, because we've noticed we got just a couple of minutes of this program.
Baron Otto von Strahl and his wife Lottie, he was the ambassador to South Africa, and she was a psychic who had been trained by Dutch doctors to diagnose illnesses with her clairvoyance when she was young, and then she gave that up and lived the life of the wife of an ambassador. He escaped from Nazi Germany just before Hitler was about to kill him, because she saw the night before that he was going to be killed if he stayed. And so they quickly got out of the country, came to this country, and of course they left everything behind, had nothing, and had to start from absolute scratch. But Lottie was a very able clairvoyant. And Agnes normally did not have a lot to do with psychics and didn't care a lot for it, but she felt that Lottie was for real, was absolutely for real in her clairvoyance, and only used it in this country because she had to earn a living, because Otto, being an ambassador, was useless to make a living anymore. He didn't have a skill, so she had to take the support of the family on. But she knew Goldie Hawn and a lot of other, and she lived in Hollywood people. And I remember one story. I was sitting in her living room one day with her, and she was telling a story about her father, and suddenly she mentioned her father, and suddenly there was this loud rap like that. And we all looked where the sound came from. It was this big bureau in the corner, and she said, "That bureau was given to me by my father, and that happens every time I mention him."
Oh, my.
And I thought, wow, okay. And that was an example, but I also saw many other examples. And Agnes had asked her to put her hand on, she had wrapped a book of Baba's God Speaks in a brown paper wrapper and asked Lottie to put her hand on it and tell her what she felt. And she put her hand on it and went, "Oh, mein Gott!" And she said that that this was a very, very special person. And I don't remember what else she said about it, but she had a tremendous reaction to the book.
Wow. Well, this is about uses up our time in this particular segment of our show with Agnes Baron and Meher Mount. And we'll have part 2 coming up on the next program. So viewers, you're cordially invited to join us next week at the same time slot, for part 2 with our interview with Sam Irvin about his experiences at Meher Mount and Agnes Baron. And next program will cover more of Meher Mount today and what is exactly occurring on a daily basis with Agnes not being there, in the body anyway,